I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime magazine. I'm here today with Gordon Lawson, CEO at Conceal, provider of an intelligence-grade zero-trust technology that protects global companies of all sizes from malware and ransomware. To learn more about our sponsor, Conceal, visit conceal.io. Also joining us is Christopher Cleary, former principal cyber advisor and former CISO at the U.S. Navy. Welcome, Chris and Gordon. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
So, Chris, a lot of people know you as the former CISO at the U.S. Navy. You've held a lot of other positions serving our country. You can explain it a lot better than I can, maybe a 30,000-foot view of your background for our listeners.
Sure. Yeah. So just recently, as of just a couple weeks ago, I finished up actually as the principal cyber advisor for the Department of the Navy. I was in that position for about 3 years. That was a byproduct of the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act that required all the services to appoint cyber advisors to their respective secretaries. As you mentioned, before that, I came back to the Department of the Navy as the Chief Information Security Officer, did that for a year, was working for Aaron Weiss under sort of a re-empowered Department of the Navy CIO office. You know, before that, a variety of defense contractors, Leidos, L3, Sparta, a tech startup that failed miserably and was with Tenable when they got to go public. Before that, also a 20-year information warfare officer within the department, working for the Navy, mostly as a surface warfare officer and eventually becoming an intelligence officer, which really led to the beginning of my cyber career. So yeah, jack of all trades, so to speak, from a Navy background.
Yeah, well, we can't wrap up without mentioning that you graduated from the U.S. Naval War College, right?
Yeah, so the War College actually, I'm also a Naval Academy grad like Gordon is, graduated just a couple years before him at the Academy. The War College was just within the career path of typical naval officers. You'll find yourself at the War College. I went through the distance education program for 3 years to get your joint professional military education, and then ultimately a master's degree in it, with a subspecialty in sort of cyber warfare, computer network operations was my focus when I was there.
So Gordon, jump in here because you and I talk to a lot of ex-military leaders, fantastic people. They make a huge contribution to our industry, but I'm curious to learn more and know more about the Navy's contribution in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think every service has its cyber force, and it's one thing that I've been lucky since I've actually gotten out of the Navy to have more interactions, because I was a surface warfare officer. I was not a information warfare or cyber officer in the military, but every force has its kind of center of operations, I would say. Chris, you can keep me honest here, but Navy's Maryland, the Army is here in Augusta. There's other sites. Air Force is a little more, what would you say, Chris, maybe more San Antonio focused, I think. So it's really interesting. And then, we have joint capabilities as well, but it's really fascinating, I think, to see even just in the last decade, it's really expanded significantly. And that was, I think, I've shared this with you, Steve. We moved Conceal from Virginia to Augusta because I think by the numbers, Augusta, Georgia is the second largest concentration of military cyber in the country. And so it's a great ecosystem that we're working to build up and bring some of those folks as they get out into the civilian world.
So Chris, you were interviewed by The Record. They wrote a great story, and you were quoted by The Record saying that the Navy had fallen behind in cyber. I don't want to take that out of context, but I am curious to know your perspective and maybe talk to us a little bit about the strategy that they unveiled.
Actually, that's a great question. If we go back 4 years, when I came back into the department working for the CIO, what that comment was mostly referencing, not necessarily cybersecurity, but a lot of our IT infrastructure had really sort of fallen behind where, let's say the commercial world had moved to. We were working on some legacy things and some stuff that had gone, was no longer being supported. So that was more of a comment of trying to get our hands around our whole IT infrastructure, modernize it to the way where it could be defended with modern day tools. What I will say is over that 4-year journey, particularly over COVID, the Navy went from a point where that was probably a true statement to a point where the Navy, particularly on its enterprise IT things, went from wherever you could say about it negatively to a very, very strong positive, being the kind of the first to roll out what we become the foundation of the Department of the Navy's now zero trust infrastructure, mostly leveraging Microsoft products with our flank speed initiative, as we pushed people to work in remote environments based on the COVID pandemic. So there were a lot of things that we learned in that space. The Navy had at the time, well, it still does, have one of the more robust CSSPs, the Navy Cyber Defensive NCDOC is what we referred to it, down in the Hampton Roads area. That is a very mature organization that does monitor currently about 750,000 endpoints of our unclassified enterprise IT environment. So where they started 4 years ago, principally under the CIO leadership, we've gotten pretty far. Now, that said, as I came on scene as the principal cyber advisor, which was a peer to the CIO, Aaron Weiss and I had sort of really figured out two ways to sort of bifurcate what we were doing for the department. He was very much on the enterprise IT, very heavy cybersecurity side of it. And the PCA came into more of the war fighting side of what we did. Think defense critical infrastructure, weapons system security, and then the advocacy and the support of the mission force. Gordon already sort of touched on it a little bit. There's a very robust 6,000 some odd operators across all of the services. Actually, I tip my hat to the Army all the time in Fort Gordon. They're probably leading the pack in a lot of this, principally with what they've done in that area. But the Navy has made some pretty significant strides in the last couple of years, to include the release of about a year ago, our cyberspace superiority vision document, which came out of the PCA office. And then just recently, as I was leaving, working in concert with the CIO, we released the Department of the Navy's first ever cyber strategy.
So, Gordon, I want to pivot and talk to something that, I didn't think I was going to bring this back up again, but we're seeing ransomware amping up. It's just become such a big problem. It's cybercrime, but, it's also cyber warfare. I mean, we're seeing it all over the place. So I do want to just ask you about this and maybe, put it in perspective for us. 2023. What did we see? Because we're not seeing any slowdown at all.
Well, I think there was a great article in Bloomberg about this, I think came out last week, Steve, and I'll just cite some facts from there. But 2022, there was a little bit of a downturn in the amount, at least, of reported ransomware. But you can see it correlated with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So the idea is that maybe some of those criminal actors were diverted. Instead of going after private corporations, they focused it on Ukraine. Once again, this is all, unclassified, open source information. But I think that makes sense that would occur. Now, when those organizations are losing their revenue stream in ransomware, they're going to ramp it back up, which makes sense in 2023, especially when I think you see Ukraine and its partners is pretty resilient to a lot of these attacks, which is great. So it's been ramped up. You have Clorox, you have Johnson Controls, you have MGM, you have Caesars. We know some of those paid ransom. We know some of those probably did, but it hasn't been confirmed. When organizations are paying tens of billions of dollars in ransom, it's going to continue. There's no way to kind of sugarcoat that. And so I think that all of those factors are what's contributed to the rise this year. And I think the numbers we're saying 500 million or so has been paid out in 2023. I expect that will continue in 2024. And the fundamental problem is that you can back up systems in order to get back online. But when you combine, I think, very advanced social engineering coupled with the power of AI, where you can basically, find out anything you wanted to be able to personalize an attack, and you still have open attack surface, which the browser and email still are, no matter what other controls you have, it's really, really hard to defend against this. So I think it's kind of a perfect storm, and I expect it will continue in 2024.
Well, Chris, to build on what Gordon just shared, we're also observing gangs who have been shut down reemerging. We see the same threat actors, coming back. So, looks like they're going away, and then we see them coming back. And the damage costs are far more than any ransoms that are being paid. Gordon, you spoke about Augusta before. What happened, there in Augusta. They were hit with a ransomware attack. I think they were, out of commission for, several weeks. Took them about a month and a half to fully come back online. So, the damage costs are really hard to estimate. Chris, how concerned are you about ransomware, and do you see a path forward on this?
Yeah, actually, it concerns me a lot. And to sort of pivot on a lot of things that Gordon said, where there's money, you're going to find people wanting to exploit those things. And you're right. As long as people are paying ransomware, people are going to continue to conduct ransomware attacks. The thing that he said that scares me the most about all of this is as ransomware can be more and more targeted. I think of ransomware, in the beginning, you think about it like a minefield. You can throw a bunch of it out there and some people click on it and some people don't. And you're an opportunistic criminal. And the people that do, you're going to lock their things up and you're going to approach them and say, hey, let's do some monetary transaction. I'll give you your information back. As ransomware can be more and more targeted, not only to the specificity of the target, let's say I can socially engineer an email that's going to be very compelling for me to want to click on it. Looks like one of my kids. But when I can start delivering ransomware with precision, not just only hooking an individual and getting them to click something, and maybe even begin to deliver ransomware where I don't need the victim to be a participant in clicking on it. As we, modify ways to do that, that's what really scares me, because that's when you really get into the weaponeering of a tool. So as we got to the World War II and the invention of the Norden bomb sight, we dropped bombs that we believed had the accuracy of the Norden bomb sight. It didn't really play out that way. You fast forward to today, we can deliver precision munitions. It's trivial now how accurate we can be with a kinetic weapon. I believe we're in the very early stages of the accuracy of cyber kind of weapons, and I'll put ransomware, wiper kind of tools into that category of effects that an adversary could generate targeted towards the things that I care about.
Hey, Steve, let me jump in on the targeted piece here. I just share a quick story with you guys that I think this happened to me last week. And I think this is not just ransomware, but this is just cyber fraud with a multi-vector approach. So top 5 bank, which is my bank, number is stolen and used on my cell phone, comes up as the bank. Very professional person on there claiming that a new account has been set up and they're transferring money via Zelle. They don't ask for any information. In fact, they have some of my PII, nothing crazy, but enough that I was like, oh, needs to be investigated. Gives me another 800 number that they say purports to be to Zelle with some case numbers and someone's name. And when you go to that, basically, like if you go to that, you're going to get an account. They're going to get your Zelle or I've also seen I've heard this happens with Venmo, and your checking account is wiped out. They're able to pretend to be legitimate sources. This is the same way, the same vector. I don't know all the details of the MGM vector, but I know that it was a very good English-speaking group that got to an IT admin, and that's how credentials were shared. I mean, this is getting really, really hard to defend against. And, I feel like I'm I'm kind of trained to know when things don't feel right. It's really, really hard for not just a consumer, but certainly even a seasoned corporate person to not fall for these.
So let me pose this to both of you. In an NBC report, Google recently shared some research we put out. They estimate 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs globally. They zero in on the US. They estimate around 600,000 of those are here in our country. How much of a part of the problem is a lack of cyber fighters, or isn't it? What's your perspective, both insofar as ransomware and more broadly cybercrime?
I think we have to, from my perspective, Steve, we have to continue getting young people into the community. We're sponsoring some great events in 2024 with the Georgia Cyber Center, which is right next door. That one is a STEM capture the flag focused event for middle school in March, then another one in September. So I think that these types of things are great. I think the other area that I really think we need to focus on, and love to get Chris's take on this, is a lot of our young warfighters who are getting out, they're sort of conditioned that they have to go back and work in government as a contractor. Whereas, Chris spent time with wasn't always a big company. It was a startup at one point at Tenable. He spent time at these other private corporations. And I think that we need to get more military talent into our cybersecurity startup ecosystem in the United States. And that's something we're working on here that I'm passionate about. But I think that's a huge talent source that we need to focus on more on that transition into the private sector.
Yeah, so I'd like to hear from you on that, Chris. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm just gonna laugh because this is a funny sort of, we could be a back and forth. A lot of the problem that we see is there are so few people in this space that, most of our young operators do, after a couple of years, make their way over to those commercial opportunities to double or sometimes triple their salaries. So we see a lot of that. So, on the other side of that coin, because everybody is desperate for talent right now. I mean, it just doesn't matter if you're government, if you're commercial, military, the intelligence community, everybody has openings. And our problem in the Department of Defense, a lot of it is the retention. When one of the good things that the DoD does for the ecosystem is we will bring in young soldiers, sailor, airmen, Marines, Guardians, Coast Guardmen, train them to be cyber operator through government programs at government expense. And yeah, they'll ultimately go out into the industry and help contribute to the environment. You're right. They all don't have to go work at Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin and Leidos. All of those companies are equally desperate for talent. And a lot of them do make their way into the Tenables and, the CrowdStrikes and these other sort of commercial security companies. What we really need to try and figure out how to do is how do you make that a more of a revolving door without a negative connotation against it? That there is a way to come back and forth, because one of the attractive things of being in uniform, whether that's law enforcement or the intelligence community or the military, is you got unique authorities. There's certain things that you can do in those jobs that you can't do in the commercial world. In the commercial world, you can certainly help build those products and provide those capabilities and solutions back to, let's say, customers that have the authorities to go use them. And I think that's where the attractiveness of staying fluid inside of this environment to go work at a place, to build a tool, to advance a capability, and then maybe be the one that goes back into the environment where you have the authorities to use that tool or capability for the government, for law enforcement, for the intelligence community. Again, because you can't do a lot of this stuff out in the private side.
So, Chris, to close out here, we're heading into 2024. There's a lot of companies that don't have CISOs. They don't have full-time cybersecurity personnel. We're talking a lot about, big agencies and large enterprises. But when you start to move downstream, these smaller companies are struggling with the same issues. They're faced with ransomware. What advice do you have for the smaller and mid-sized company that don't have those type of resources?
So I'm not going to say this is necessarily advice for the smaller or mid-sized companies, but I think one of the concepts that I saw the NSTAC release many, many years ago was this idea of kind of acknowledging what you as an organization should be capable of doing. For instance, I would expect Citibank to be much more capable at dealing with cyber activity, nefarious activity in their environments than a small startup or a flower company, right? That don't necessarily have large IT staffs where people that would, their business is not to do IT. It's just, I need IT to enable their business. And this is where they get caught up in these malware, ransomware things that they just don't anticipate coming. So I think the real advice is, find a CISO, find a security professional who really understands how to interact with the organizations that they may need to interact with if they have a problem. Do you have somebody that has a relationship or understands the way I'm going to call CISA or local law enforcement when I have a malware, how I'm going to do continuity of operations? Because I think the CISO of 10 years ago was a compliance CISO. I've got my compliance. I'm going to go through my checklist. I'm going to meet the things I need to do. That's a different animal than somebody who has to know how to deal in an emergency. Think first responders, right? That's hey, I show up on an event. It's a mess. I know I have to get resources to people that I need, or how to communicate activities back and forth. I think that's the new skill set of the CISO, is knowing how to operate when things go bad, not just know that I've met all the checklists of my company to ensure that I'm doing the best that I can to protect my infrastructure.
So, Gordon, I think, we're, fans of Conceal. We've taken your technology into the labs and, very jazzed about what you're doing. But I think more importantly, it's all of these tentacles you have out there, these partners who are working with Conceal that are equipped to help these small and mid-sized businesses who are faced with a huge challenge. They're staring down the barrel at ransomware and they just don't know where to begin. How important is that for the vendor community to partner up to help these small companies?
Well, as I've said many times, Steve, we love the MSP community. We think that they're the backbone of protecting the small businesses of America, because, most companies less than 1,000 or less than 500 employees or less than 100 employees, which is a whole lot of them, don't necessarily have all the resources they need. And so we want to give them great threat intelligence about what we're seeing at the browser level so they can protect themselves better, a great telemetry, if you will. We want to partner with the other tools they have so that what they've already invested in works well. and do it at a very reasonable and competitive price point. We're very passionate about that. But I think that every vendor out there, and obviously vendors take on different shapes and sizes, but really having an offering that supports that small business community through MSPs is critical from our perspective.
Well, gentlemen, we appreciate having both of you on with us. Chris, it was a privilege. Thank you so much for your service to our country, to the Navy, and the contributions to cyber. Hope you'll keep in touch with us as you continue on your journey.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you for having me.
I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime magazine. This interview is sponsored by Conceal, provider of an intelligence-grade zero-trust technology that protects global companies of all sizes from malware and ransomware. To learn more, visit conceal.io. You can keep up with all of our media at cybercrimemagazine.com.